Hello, everyone. My name is Margaret, but for most of my life, people knew me as Michael. I'm 72 years old now, and I've been waiting decades to tell this story. What you're about to hear isn't just about clothes or makeup. It's about identity, family, love, and the incredible journey of finding yourself when the world expects you to be someone else entirely. Before we begin, I want to say something important. This story is mine, and it's deeply personal. I'm sharing it because I know there are others out there who felt the same confusion, the same fear, the same desperate longing to just be themselves. If that's you, I hope my story gives you hope. If you're watching because you're trying to understand someone you love, I hope this helps you see things from our perspective. Now, let me take you back to where it all started. The year was 1959, and I was just 7 years old. We lived in a modest two-story house on Elm Street in a quiet suburb outside of Philadelphia. My father worked at the steel mill, coming home every evening with his hands stained black and his back aching. My mother was a seamstress, one of the finest in our neighborhood. She could look at a dress in a shop window and recreate it perfectly at home with her Singer sewing machine. That machine, with its rhythmic clicking and the way the needle danced up and down, became the soundtrack of my childhood. I had two older sisters, Patricia and Eleanor. Patricia was 12, already developing the kind of grace and poise that made adults stop and comment on what a lovely young lady she was becoming. Eleanor was 10, more tomboyish than Patricia, but still unmistakably feminine in the way she moved and spoke. Then there was me, the youngest, the only boy, the one my father looked at with a mixture of pride and expectation. My mother's sewing room was on the second floor, right next to my bedroom. It was a magical place, filled with bolts of fabric in every color imaginable. There were silks that shimmered in the afternoon light, cottons printed with tiny flowers, velvets so soft they felt like touching a cloud. Spools of thread lined the walls in rainbow order, and there were buttons, thousands of them, kept in old mason jars. But what fascinated me most were the dress forms, those headless, armless figures that stood in the corner, wearing whatever project my mother was working on. One Saturday afternoon in late spring, my mother was downstairs helping my father with something in the garden. My sisters had gone to a birthday party down the street. I was supposed to be playing with my toy trucks in my room, but I could hear that sewing machine calling to me through the wall. I knew I shouldn't go in there without permission. My mother had told me 100 times that her sewing room was off limits when she wasn't there. Those pins and needles were sharp, she'd say. I could hurt myself. But curiosity got the better of me that day. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The afternoon sun was streaming through the window, making everything glow. On the dress form nearest the window was a dress my mother had just finished for Patricia. It was for her school's spring dance, made of pale blue taffeta with a fitted bodice and a full skirt. The fabric rustled even though nothing was touching it, moved by the breeze coming through the open window. I don't know what possessed me to do what I did next. Even now, all these years later, I can't fully explain the compulsion. I reached out and touched the dress, running my fingers over the smooth fabric. It felt cool and wonderful. Then, almost without thinking, I lifted it off the dress form. It was heavier than I expected. The skirt had layers of crinoline underneath that gave it that bell shape. I held it up against my body and walked over to the full-length mirror my mother used for fitting. The boy staring back at me looked strange holding that dress, but there was something else in his eyes too. Something that looked almost like recognition. I glanced at the door. The house was quiet. I could still hear my parents talking in the garden, their voices distant and muffled. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst right out of my chest. I knew this was wrong. Boys don't wear dresses. Boys don't even think about wearing dresses. But my hands were already pulling my shirt over my head, already unbuttoning my shorts. Getting into that dress was harder than I'd imagined. There was a zipper up the back that I couldn't quite reach, but I managed to get the dress on well enough that it stayed up. It was far too big for me, of course. The bodice gaped open, and the skirt pooled on the floor around my feet. But when I looked in that mirror again, something shifted inside me. For the first time in my 7 years of life, I felt like I was seeing myself. Not Michael, the boy who was supposed to love baseball and getting dirty and fighting with other boys. But someone else. Someone who'd been hiding inside me all along. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, just staring at my reflection. I lifted the skirt slightly and swished it back and forth, watching how the fabric moved. I smiled at myself in the mirror, and the person smiling back looked genuinely happy. Then I heard my mother's footsteps on the stairs. The panic that shot through me was like nothing I'd ever experienced. I tried to tear the dress off, but the zipper was stuck. My hands were shaking so badly, I couldn't get a grip on it. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear my mother humming one of her favorite songs. Any second now, she'd reach the top of the stairs and see me. I finally managed to yank the dress over my head, not caring that I heard something rip in the process. I threw it back on the dress form, all askew and wrinkled. I grabbed my shorts and shirt and dove back into my own room just as my mother's footsteps passed by in the hallway. She went into the bathroom. I heard the door close, the water running. I sat on my bed, still in my underwear, my whole body trembling. I'd gotten away with it. She hadn't seen me. But instead of relief, all I felt was a crushing disappointment. I wanted to go back. I wanted to put that dress on again and stand in front of that mirror and feel that sense of rightness that I'd felt for those brief, stolen moments. That night at dinner, my father asked me what I'd done all day. I mumbled something about playing with my trucks. He nodded approvingly and launched into a story about his own boyhood, about the time he'd hit a baseball so hard it broke a window 3 houses down. Everyone laughed. I pushed my peas around my plate and tried to forget the feeling of taffeta against my skin. But I couldn't forget. That moment in my mother's sewing room became my secret, my precious, terrible secret. I would lie awake at night thinking about it, replaying every detail. The weight of the dress, the way the skirt moved, that face in the mirror that looked like me but better somehow, more complete. I started finding excuses to go into the sewing room when my mother was working. I'd ask her questions about what she was making, about how the sewing machine worked, about the different types of fabric. She seemed pleased by my interest. My father, on the other hand, would frown when he came home and found me there. "Why don't you go outside and play?" he'd say. "It's a beautiful day. Boys should be outside, not cooped up indoors with all this women stuff." My mother would defend me, saying there was nothing wrong with the boy being interested in how things were made. But I could see the worry in her eyes too. I was different from other boys, and even at 7 years old, I knew that being different was dangerous. The next time I wore one of my mother's creations, I was 9 years old. My sisters had both gotten new dresses for Easter Sunday, beautiful matching dresses in yellow with white lace collars. The night before Easter, after everyone had gone to bed, I crept into Patricia's room. She was 14 now, and she slept like the dead. Nothing could wake her once she was out. Her new dress was hanging on the back of her closet door. In the dim light from the street lamp outside, it seemed to glow. I took it down as carefully as I could and carried it back to my room like it was made of gold. This time, I'd planned better. I'd practiced with the zippers on my own clothes, twisting my arms back to reach them. I managed to get the dress on properly, and because I'd grown and Patricia was still slim, it actually fit reasonably well. I stood in front of my small mirror, the one on my dresser, and felt that same surge of rightness I'd felt 2 years earlier. But this time, it wasn't enough just to put the dress on. I wanted more. I wanted to see the whole picture. I tiptoed down the hall to the bathroom, where there was a bigger mirror. I had to pass my parents' bedroom to get there. Their door was slightly ajar, and I could hear my father snoring, steady and loud. In the bathroom, I switched on the light and really looked at myself for the first time. The dress fit well through the bodice, and the skirt came to just above my knees. My hair was short, of course, the typical boy's haircut of the era, but I tried to imagine it longer. I found my mother's lipstick in the medicine cabinet and carefully applied it the way I'd watched my sisters do 100 times. The color was too dark for the dress, a deep red that looked almost purple, but I didn't care. I was transformed. I stood there for nearly half an hour, turning this way and that, trying different poses, imagining myself as the girl I felt like inside. I was so absorbed that I didn't hear my mother get up. didn't hear her footsteps in the hall. The first I knew of her presence was when the bathroom door swung open wider, and there she stood, her face a mixture of shock and something else I couldn't quite identify. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. I wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and never be seen again. My mother's eyes traveled from my face down to the dress and back up again. Her hand came up to her mouth. "Michael," she whispered. "What are you doing?" I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up completely. Tears started streaming down my face, mixing with the lipstick and probably making me look like a complete mess. My mother stepped into the bathroom and closed the door quietly behind her. She stood there for a moment, thinking. Then she did something I never expected. She reached out and gently wiped the tears from my cheeks. "It's Patricia's dress," I finally managed to say. "I'm sorry. I'll put it back. I just wanted to see. I just wanted to know what it felt like." "How long?" my mother asked. Her voice was gentle, not angry. "How long have you been doing this?" I told her everything. About the blue taffeta dress when I was 7. About how I couldn't stop thinking about it. About how wrong I felt being a boy, how right it felt when I wore the dresses. The words came pouring out like water from a burst dam, years of secrecy and shame and confusion all tumbling out at once. My mother listened to everything without interrupting. When I finally ran out of words, she sat down on the edge of the bathtub and pulled me down next to her. "Michael," she said, "there's something you need to understand. The world isn't kind to people who are different. Your father, he has certain ideas about how boys should be and how girls should be. If he knew about this, I don't know what he'd do. He loves you. But this would be very hard for him to understand." "I know," I said miserably. "I know it's wrong. I've tried to stop thinking about it, but I can't." "I didn't say it was wrong," my mother said carefully. "I said the world isn't kind. There's a difference. But you have to be careful, Michael. You have to be so very careful." Then she did something that both thrilled and terrified me. She stood up and looked at me critically, the way she looked at her dress forms when she was checking the fit of a garment. "That lipstick is all wrong for your coloring," she said. "And it's way too grown up for a dress like that. Here, let me show you." For the next hour, my mother taught me how to properly apply makeup. "Just the basics," she said. "Just enough to look natural." She showed me how to blend, how to choose colors that complemented my skin tone, how to apply mascara without poking myself in the eye. It was the most surreal experience of my young life, standing there in my sister's Easter dress, while my mother transformed my face. When she was done, I looked in the mirror again. The girl looking back at me was pretty. Not beautiful, but pretty in a wholesome, natural way. My mother smiled sadly. "You make a lovely girl," she said. "But this has to be our secret, Michael. You understand that, don't you? Your father can never know. Your sisters can never know. This is just between us." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Once a month," she said. "On Saturday afternoons when your father goes to his lodge meeting and your sisters are at their activities. You can come to my sewing room and we'll have our time. But only then and only in the house. And you have to promise me you'll never take your sister's clothes again. If you want to wear dresses, I'll make them for you. Proper dresses that fit." It was more than I'd ever dreamed of. I threw my arms around her and hugged her so tight, I thought her ribs might crack. She hugged me back, and I felt her tears dripping onto my head. That's how it started. Once a month, regular as clockwork, I would transform from Michael into the girl I felt like inside. My mother made me 4 dresses that first year, each one more beautiful than the last. She kept them in a garment bag at the very back of her sewing room closet, hidden behind bolts of fabric and boxes of old clothes. On our special Saturdays, she would help me dress and do my makeup, and then we'd have tea together in the sewing room, just the two of us, pretending we were ladies at a fancy afternoon social. Those were some of the happiest times of my childhood. My mother never made me feel ashamed or wrong. She never asked me why I wanted to wear dresses or if I wanted to be a girl. She simply accepted this part of me and gave me a safe space to express it. Looking back now, I realize what a gift that was, how rare and precious. But she was right about my father. He could never know. I lived in constant fear that he'd somehow find out, that he'd discover the dresses hidden in the closet or catch me on one of our Saturday afternoons. My father wasn't a cruel man, but he was a product of his time and his upbringing. He had very fixed ideas about masculinity and what it meant to be a man. I knew instinctively that if he ever found out about my secret, it would break something between us that could never be repaired. So I learned to be two people. During the week, at school and around the neighborhood, I was Michael, the quiet boy who was never quite good enough at sports, who preferred reading to roughhousing, who the other boys tolerated but never really included. And once a month, for a few precious hours, I was someone else. I never gave her a name during those years. She was just me, the real me, the version of myself that felt natural and right. The years passed. I entered my teenage years, and everything became more complicated. My body started changing in ways that filled me with horror. My voice began to drop. Hair started appearing in places I didn't want it. I sprouted up to nearly 6 feet tall, all gangly limbs and awkward angles. Every change felt like a betrayal, like my body was turning into something foreign and wrong. My mother did what she could. She showed me how to shave my legs without cutting myself, how to tuck in a way that made my body look more feminine in the dresses. But there was only so much that could be done. I looked less and less like the girl in my mind, and more like a boy playing dress-up. High school was torture. I tried to fit in, tried to be the boy everyone expected me to be. I joined the drama club, figuring at least there I could be around creative people who might be more accepting of someone different. I even got a few parts in school plays, always character roles, never the romantic lead. My father came to see one of my performances and spent the whole drive home talking about how I should go out for football instead, build up my body, make something of myself. By the time I was 17, our monthly Saturday sessions had mostly stopped. My mother's health had started to decline. She developed arthritis in her hands, making it painful for her to sew. More than that, though, I think we both knew I was getting too old for our little make-believe tea parties. I was nearly a grown man, at least on the outside, and the cognitive dissonance between who I was and who I felt like was becoming unbearable. I graduated high school in 1970. The country was changing rapidly. The war in Vietnam was raging, protest movements were sweeping through cities, young people were challenging every social norm. For a brief moment, I thought maybe the world was becoming a place where someone like me could exist openly. But in our small suburb, in our conservative neighborhood, those changes felt very far away. My father wanted me to get a job at the steel mill like him. I wanted to go to college, to get away, to find a place where I could figure out who I really was. We compromised. I enrolled in the state university 30 miles away and commuted from home to save money. I studied business administration because it seemed safe and practical, even though what I really wanted to study was fashion design. College opened up new worlds to me. For the first time, I met other people who didn't fit into neat categories. There were guys with long hair who wore beaded necklaces, girls who refused to wear bras or shave their legs, people who seemed comfortable blurring the lines between masculine and feminine. I made friends with a group of theater students who accepted me without question, who never asked why I preferred their company to the business majors in my own classes. It was through these friends that I first heard the word that would change my life: transgender. One of my friends, a girl named Sarah, was reading a book about Christine Jorgensen, the American woman who'd gone to Denmark in the 1950s for gender reassignment surgery. Sarah passed the book to me one day, saying she thought I might find it interesting. I read that book in one sitting, hiding in my dorm room between classes. It was like reading about myself. Here was someone who'd been born male but knew, deeply and completely, that she was meant to be female. Someone who'd done something about it, who'd taken the brave and terrifying step of becoming who she really was.
I wanted that.
Oh, how badly I wanted it. But the price seemed impossibly high. The surgery was expensive and had to be done overseas. The hormone therapy was still experimental. Most importantly, choosing that path meant losing everything and everyone you'd ever known. Christine Jorgensen had been rejected by her family, had become a spectacle, had spent the rest of her life as a curiosity rather than simply being allowed to live as a woman. Could I do that? Could I give up my family, my home, everything familiar and safe, for the chance to be myself? At 19 years old, I didn't have that kind of courage. So I made a different choice. I decided to bury that part of myself as deeply as I could. I threw away the books and articles I'd been collecting. I avoided my theater friends and started hanging out with the business majors. I got a haircut, the shortest I'd ever had. I started lifting weights at the campus gym, trying to build up my body into something more traditionally masculine. And I started dating girls. Her name was Jennifer, and she was everything a 19-year-old boy was supposed to want. Pretty, popular, easy to talk to. We met in an economics class and started studying together. One thing led to another, and soon we were a couple. My father was thrilled. Finally, his son was acting like a normal man. I tried to make it work. I really did. Jennifer was kind and sweet, and she genuinely seemed to like me. When we kissed, I tried to feel something beyond friendly affection. When she talked about our future together, about getting married after graduation, about the house we'd have and the children we'd raise, I tried to imagine myself in that picture. But late at night, alone in my room, I'd pull out the one dress I'd kept, a simple blue cotton dress my mother had made for me when I was 15. I'd hidden it in the back of my closet, behind boxes of old textbooks. I'd hold it against my body and remember what it felt like to be myself, to be the girl hiding inside this increasingly masculine body. The relationship with Jennifer lasted 2 years. We broke up just before graduation when she found out I'd been accepted to graduate school in New York City. She didn't want to leave our hometown. She wanted to get married right away and start our life together. When I told her I was taking the grad school offer, she looked at me like I'd slapped her. "I don't understand you, Michael," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I thought you loved me. I thought we had a future together." "I do care about you," I said, which was true. "But I need to do this. I need to find out who I am." "Who you are," she said bitterly. "You're my boyfriend. That's who you are. Or at least, that's who I thought you were." We said goodbye in the parking lot of the diner where we'd had our first date. I watched her drive away and felt mostly relief. I was free. At 22 years old, I was finally going to be free. New York City in 1973 was a revelation. I'd never seen so many people in one place, so much diversity, so much energy. I found a tiny studio apartment in Greenwich Village that cost more per month than I'd thought possible, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had my own space where no one could walk in on me, where I didn't have to hide. The first thing I did was go shopping. Not to the big department stores, but to a little boutique I'd heard about from someone at school, a place that catered to what they called gender nonconforming individuals. The owner, a woman named Madge who had to be in her 60s, took one look at me and smiled knowingly. "First time shopping for yourself, honey?" she asked. I nodded, unable to speak. "Take your time," she said. "Try on whatever you want. The dressing room is in the back, and I promise no one will bother you." I spent 3 hours in that store. I tried on dozens of dresses, skirts, blouses, everything I dreamed of wearing for years. I bought a wig, a light brown shoulder-length style that looked vaguely like what women were wearing that year. I bought makeup, proper makeup, not just stolen bits from my mother's collection. And I bought shoes, beautiful shoes with modest heels that somehow made me feel more feminine than any dress ever could. When I got back to my apartment, I laid everything out on my bed and just looked at it. This was mine. No one could take it away. No one even had to know about it. This could be my private life, the thing I did behind closed doors while I presented as Michael to the rest of the world. And that's exactly what I did for the next 15 years. Publicly, I was Michael. I finished my MBA. I got a good job at an accounting firm. I moved to a better apartment, still in the village, but in a nicer building. I dated occasionally, always women, though none of those relationships ever went anywhere serious. I had friends, colleagues, a perfectly normal life by all external measures. But privately, in the safety of my apartment, I was someone else. I never chose a name during those years. I'd come home from work, change into one of my dresses, do my makeup, and just exist. I'd make dinner and eat it while wearing a nice skirt and blouse. I'd sit on my couch watching television in a comfortable dress. On weekends, I'd spend entire days dressed, never leaving the apartment, just being myself. It was a strange half-life, satisfying in some ways, but deeply lonely in others. I couldn't share this part of myself with anyone. My mother had passed away my last year of college, taking our secret with her to the grave. My father and sisters had no idea. My friends from work had no idea. I was living a double life, and the strain of it was slowly crushing me. The turning point came in 1988. I was 35 years old, successful by conventional standards, but miserable in ways I couldn't articulate to anyone. I'd been reading about support groups for crossdressers and transgender individuals, places where people like me could meet and talk and be themselves without judgment. It took me 6 months to work up the courage to attend a meeting. The group met in a community center in Chelsea twice a month. I must have walked past that building 4 times before I finally forced myself to go inside. My hands were shaking as I climbed the stairs to the meeting room. I could hear voices and laughter coming from behind the closed door. What if someone recognized me? What if word got back to my office somehow? What if I opened that door and everyone could tell I was a fraud, that I wasn't really one of them? But I opened the door anyway. And what I found on the other side changed everything. There were about 20 people in the room, and they ran the full spectrum of gender expression. Some were dressed in women's clothes, but made no attempt to fully present as female. Others were in full makeup and beautiful outfits and looked absolutely stunning. A few people were in men's clothes, but something about the way they carried themselves suggested they might identify more feminine. Everyone turned to look at me as I entered, and I nearly turned and ran. But then a woman approached me, smiling warmly. She was probably in her 50s, elegantly dressed in a simple black dress and pearls. She extended her hand. "Welcome," she said. "I'm Catherine. Is this your first time?" I nodded, still unable to find my voice. "You're in a safe space here," she said gently. "No judgment, no pressure. Why don't you come sit down, and we'll introduce you to everyone." That night, for the first time in my life, I heard other people's stories. Stories that sounded so much like my own it was almost eerie. People who'd known from childhood they were different. People who'd hidden for years, decades even. People who'd lost families and jobs and homes because of who they were. And people who'd found happiness, who'd transitioned fully, or who'd found a way to exist between the categories society tried to impose on them. I started attending those meetings regularly. I made friends, real friends who knew the truth about me. I started going out occasionally, to clubs and restaurants and theaters that were known to be safe spaces. Always dressed as Michael left his apartment, then changing in a bathroom or back room into the person I wanted to be. It was liberating and terrifying in equal measure. Every time I walked down a street presenting as female, I was sure someone would clock me, would shout something horrible, would maybe even attack me. But mostly, people just ignored me. I was just another woman in the city, unremarkable and invisible in the best possible way. Through the support group, I met a therapist who specialized in gender identity issues. Dr. Karen Winters became my lifeline over the next few years. She helped me understand that what I was feeling had a name: gender dysphoria. She explained that I wasn't broken or perverted or sick. I was simply someone whose internal sense of gender didn't match the body I'd been born into. "The question you need to ask yourself," Dr. Winters said during one of our sessions, "is what do you want? Not what society expects, not what your family wants, not what's convenient or easy. What do you, Michael, want for your life?" It was the first time anyone had asked me that question. I sat in her office, tears streaming down my face, and finally admitted the truth out loud. "I want to be a woman," I said. "I want to live as a woman. I want people to see me and know me as a woman. I'm 42 years old, and I have never wanted anything more in my entire life." Dr. Winters nodded, unsurprised. "Then let's talk about what that would look like. Let's talk about transition." The word hung in the air between us. Transition. It sounded so clinical, so simple. But the reality was anything but. Transition meant hormone therapy, which at my age would have limited effects. It meant possibly surgery, though that was expensive and not without risks. It meant coming out to everyone I knew and accepting that some, maybe most, of them would reject me. It meant potentially losing my job, my apartment, my place in the world. But it also meant being myself. Really, truly myself, for however many years I had left. I want to tell you that I made the brave choice right then, that I walked out of Dr. Winter's office and started my transition immediately. But that's not what happened. Fear held me back for 5 more years. 5 years of support group meetings and therapy sessions and getting dressed up in my apartment, but still presenting as Michael to the world. 5 years of watching other people in my support group take steps I was too afraid to take. 5 years of my life slipping away while I stood paralyzed at the crossroads. What finally pushed me over the edge was my father's death in 1995. He'd had a massive heart attack at the mill, gone quickly without suffering. At his funeral, I stood looking down at him in his casket, and all I could think was that he'd never known me. My own father had lived his entire life knowing only the shell I presented to the world, never the person inside. I didn't want to die like that. I didn't want to reach the end of my life having never lived authentically. And if I was honest with myself, my father's death removed one of the biggest obstacles to transition. I wouldn't have to see the disappointment in his eyes. I wouldn't have to hear him tell me I wasn't his son anymore. I started hormone therapy 3 months after the funeral. I was 47 years old, which the doctor said was late, but not impossibly so. The estrogen and testosterone blockers would soften my features somewhat, redistribute some fat to a more feminine pattern, and hopefully allow some breast development. But I'd never be conventionally beautiful. I'd never be able to hide the fact that I'd gone through a male puberty. And I was okay with that. I wasn't doing this to be attractive or to pass perfectly as female. I was doing this to be myself. The hormones took months to show any noticeable effects, which gave me time to start making other changes. I let my hair grow out. I started laser hair removal on my face, a painful and expensive process that took nearly 2 years. I began dressing more androgynously at work, slowly pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable. I came out to my closest friends, all from the support group, and asked them to start using female pronouns and a new name. That was perhaps the most significant moment of all. After 47 years, I finally chose a name for the person I'd been hiding all my life. Margaret. It had been my mother's middle name, and using it felt like a way of honoring the woman who'd first accepted me all those years ago. But the world at large still knew me as Michael. My coworkers, my acquaintances, my sisters who I rarely saw but occasionally talked to on holidays, they all still thought I was the man I'd always pretended to be. And I knew that had to change. Coming out at work was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I scheduled a meeting with my supervisor and the HR director. I'd rehearsed what I was going to say 100 times, but when I actually sat down in that conference room, every planned word fled from my mind. I'm transgender. I finally blurted out. I've been living as a man for my entire life, but that's not who I am. I'm a woman, and I'm transitioning. I wanted to tell you before it becomes obvious. The silence that followed felt like it lasted for hours. My supervisor, a man named Robert who I'd worked with for over a decade, just stared at me. The HR director, a woman named Susan, glanced at Robert and then back at me. Okay, Susan finally said. Thank you for telling us. I have to be honest, this is new territory for all of us. But we'll figure it out. We spent the next hour discussing logistics. What name would I use? What pronouns? When did I want to start presenting as female at work? What about the bathrooms? What would we tell my clients? Some of it went better than I'd hoped. The company had non-discrimination policies that included gender identity, even back in 1996, when that was relatively rare. They agreed to let me transition on the job rather than forcing me to quit and find a new position. But there were complications too. Some of my longtime clients were less than thrilled about the change. A few of them requested different accountants. My supervisor, while professional about the whole thing, clearly felt uncomfortable around me after that. But I was done hiding. I started going to work as Margaret, wearing women's business suits and modest makeup. I legally changed my name and updated all my documents. I told my sisters, expecting the worst and getting something slightly better. Patricia was shocked but ultimately supportive, saying she just wanted me to be happy. Eleanor took it harder, saying she didn't understand and needed time to process. She came around eventually, though our relationship was never quite the same after that. The world had changed since I was young, but it hadn't changed enough. I got stares everywhere I went. People would do double takes when they heard my voice, which no amount of therapy had quite managed to make sound convincingly female. I got called slurs on the street. I lost friends who couldn't handle the transition. Dating became impossible because straight men didn't see me as a woman and lesbian women didn't either. But you know what? I was happier than I'd ever been. Because every morning, I woke up and looked in the mirror and saw myself. Not a perfect version, not the woman I might have been if I'd been born female, but myself nonetheless. The person I'd spent my entire life hiding was finally free. I lived and worked as Margaret through my 50s and into my 60s. I retired from the accounting firm at 65, tired of the corporate world, and ready to do something more meaningful with the time I had left. I started volunteering with LGBTQ youth organizations, sharing my story with young people who were struggling with their own identities. If even one kid heard my story and felt less alone, less broken, less hopeless, then everything I'd been through is worth it. And then, at 68 years old, when I'd long since given up on finding love, I met someone. Her name was Elizabeth, and she was a widow who'd lost her husband 10 years earlier. We met at a bookstore of all places, both reaching for the same novel at the same time. We laughed, got to talking, ended up having coffee together. We talked for 3 hours that first day, and I knew I had to tell her the truth before this went any further. "There's something you need to know about me," I said, my heart pounding. "I'm transgender. I transitioned later in life, but I wasn't born female. If that's a problem for you, I completely understand." Elizabeth looked at me for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Margaret," she said, "I've spent 10 years alone. 10 years thinking I'd never connect with anyone again. I don't care about your history or your body or any of that. I care about the woman sitting across from me right now, the woman who's kind and interesting and who makes me laugh. That's who you are to me." I fell in love with Elizabeth slowly and completely. She became my best friend, my confidant, my partner in every sense of the word. We traveled together, went to shows together, spent quiet evenings at home reading in comfortable silence. She knew all of my history, all of my struggles, and loved me anyway, not despite them, but as part of the whole package of who I was. We got married 3 years ago in a small ceremony with just a few close friends. It was legal by then, gay marriage having been legalized nationwide. Standing there at age 70, holding Elizabeth's hands and promising to love her for whatever time we had left, I felt complete in a way I'd never imagined possible. So here I am now, 72 years old, looking back at this strange and complicated life I've lived. From that 7-year-old boy putting on his sister's dress in his mother's sewing room to the woman I am today, married and happy and finally at peace with myself. Was it worth it? Every moment of pain, every loss, every fear, every second of living and hiding, was it worth it to finally be myself? Yes. 1,000 times yes. If you're watching this and you're struggling with your own identity, whatever that might look like, I want you to know something. You are not alone. You are not broken. You are not wrong. The world will try to tell you otherwise. People will tell you to conform, to hide, to be what they want you to be rather than who you actually are. But that voice inside you, the one telling you who you really are, that voice is right. You deserve to be yourself. You deserve to be happy. You deserve to live authentically, whatever that means for you. It won't be easy. I won't lie to you and say it will be. But it will be worth it. And to anyone watching this who loves someone who's questioning their gender identity, who's struggling with who they are, I want to say this. You have an opportunity to be the person my mother was for me. You can be the safe space, the accepting presence, the one who says, "I see you, and I love you for who you are." That kind of acceptance can literally save lives. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And thank you for being you, whoever that is. This is Margaret, signing off. Remember to be kind to yourselves and to each other. The world has enough judgment in it already. What it needs is more love, more acceptance, More people willing to see beyond the surface to the beautiful, complicated, messy humanity underneath. Take care, everyone. And never, ever give up on being yourself.